Once upon a time at Bardardal, there lived a wealthy priest, Stein, who was also a good farmer. His son, Kjartan, had grown to become a fine young man. Sandhaugar, situated to the south of Bardardal, had a resident called Thorstein the White, who was married to the jovial Steinvor. At the time they had young children, and their place was always perceived to be haunted by trolls. 2 winters before Kron's came up north, Steinvor, the mistress of Sandhaugar, had gone to spend Yule at Bardardal, as she always did. Her husband had stayed behind. One evening, the men heard an unusual noise coming from the room adjacent to the master's bed. However, due to their low numbers, no one dared to go and investigate. When the mistress of the house came back the following morning, her spouse had vanished, and nobody had a clue as to his whereabouts. The next season came and went, with no sight of the missing husband. But in the winter that followed, Steinvor desired to attend Mass and ordered her servant to stay behind. Despite his reluctance, he did as he was told. The same thing happened that night, and the assistant disappeared without a trace. There were some droplets of blood outside the door, leading people to presume that some evil entity had taken both men away. The story made its rounds and eventually reached Kron's ears. Being known for his expertise in tackling ghosts and spectres, he headed to Bardardal and got to Sandhaugar on Yule Eve. He disguised himself as guest. The mistress of the house and the staff were petrified of him, noticing how tall he was. He requested hospitality, and the lady offered food, explaining to him that he would have to fend for himself. He accepted the conditions and promised to keep the house safe while she attended Mass. She marveled at his bravery and offered that he could come along. The man declined, saying that he was not one for monotony. She had, however, lamented the impossibility of crossing the river. Chapter 16. We continue the tale of Guest. It was towards the midnight hour when a loud commotion stirred him from his slumber. In walked a troll-wife, towering in size, with a trough grasped tightly in her hand and a cutlass held firmly in the other. Upon spotting Guest, she charged at him without hesitation. He sprang up and launched a vicious attack in defense. The altercations continued for hours, with both combatants delivering and receiving blows with great force. The room was left in ruins, its furnishings destroyed and its walls battered. The troll-wife then pulled Guest out of the house and onto the porch, where he continued to fight her with unwavering determination. They battled with such ferocity that even the fittings of the outer door were torn away and discarded. The demon then attempted to drag Guest to the river, with him struggling to evade the rocks and the current. Through the night they grappled with each other relentlessly, and Guest was astounded by the monster's incredible strength. She held him so tightly that he could only clutch at her waist with both hands. It was only when they reached a rocky area by the river that Guest managed to free his right hand and quickly unsheathed the sword at his side. With all his might, he swung the blade, severing the troll-wife's right arm and freeing himself from her grasp. She scurried away into the waterfall, and Guest lay by the rock for a long while, exhausted and delirious from the battle. As day broke, he slowly made his way back home and collapsed on his bed, marked with bruises and wounds. Upon the lady of the house's return, she found the property in decay and demanded an explanation. Guest recounted the whole story to her, and she was taken aback by the enormity of his bravery. She inquired as to who he was, and he divulged his true identity, requesting that she summon a priest to attend to him. It was settled. Kron's and the priest would venture forth to the falls and witness the truth of Kron's tale. They arrived at the cliff face, its sheer surface daunting in its height and steepness. They beheld the waterfall pouring down, the mist and spray causing the rocks to glimmer in the light. Kron's pointed to a cave in the rock face, so high up it seemed all but inaccessible. The priest scoffed, saying that no one could possibly climb to such a height. Kron's begged to differ, saying that only the most courageous and skilled of men were suited to such a feat. He produced a rope, and with the priest's reluctant approval, set about securing it to a stake in the ground. They carefully made their way down, the priest's nervousness growing with each step. Eventually they reached the cave, and there, before their very eyes, lay a gruesome sight. The bodies of the missing men were strewn about, torn apart by some savage beast. The priest was agape with horror, while Kron's maintained his stoic demeanor. He had known all along what they would find. The 2 men made their way back up the rope, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what they had seen. Kron's knew that he had been vindicated in the eyes of the priest, but at what cost? The truth had been revealed, but at the expense of several lives. Back in the village, Kron's shared his story with the locals, who were shaken by the grisly nature of his discovery. They kept him hidden away, fearful for his safety. What other dangers lurked in the wilds of Sandhauger, and who else might fall victim to the creature that had taken the lives of so many? Only time would tell. Kron's secured a stone into a loop at the bottom of the rope and lowered it down into the water. The priest inquired, "Which way do you intend to go?" Kron's replied, "I don't want to be constrained when I approach the fall. My intuition advises against it." Kron's readied himself to go, with little clothing and only a short sword. He leaped from a rock and descended towards the waterfall. The priest saw the soles of his feet, but nothing else thereafter. Kron's had taken the plunge. Navigating the swirling currents was arduous, and Kron's needed to submerge himself deeply to sneak behind the waterfall. He surfaced beside a large rock, with a tremendous cave yawning before him. Inside, a ferocious giant was seated before a crackling fire. The giant was an imposing sight, and Kron's knew he would have to be exceptionally cautious. As soon as Kron's came into view, the giant sprang to his feet and grasped a pike, brandishing it at Kron's, who promptly blocked the strike with his sword. The pike had a wooden shaft and was the hepatica type. Kron's, on the other hand, swung back with his sword, and it sliced through the shaft with ease. As the giant tried to grasp a sword that hung within the cavern, Kron's seized the moment and slashed at him, separating his guts from his lower belly so that they dropped into the river and drifted away. The priest, sitting with the rope downstream, saw the debris awash with blood and became distraught, thinking Kron's had died. He abandoned the rope and went home, telling everyone that Kron's had died, and it was a significant loss for the community. Kron's delivered a few more blows to the giant before he finally died. He then ventured deeper into the cavern, lit a light, and traversed the area. The story goes that he found some treasure in there, though we don't know how much exactly. He stayed deep in the cave until the night had long settled in, and that's when he saw them, the bones of 2 men, lying there in the dark. He carefully gathered them up and wrapped them in sturdy skin, tucking them under his arm. Emerging from the cave, he swam over to the rope and gave it a shake, hoping the priest who had guided him there was still waiting. But the rope was empty, the priest already gone. So he clambered up it himself, one hand gripping the rope, the other holding tightly onto the bundle of bones. When he got back to Ajardalsa, he laid the skin in the vestibule of the church, along with a rune staff that he had fashioned himself. Its carvings were incredibly detailed, telling the tale of his journey into the cave and what he had found there. Taking a deep breath, Kron's began reciting the lines etched into the staff. "I entered the gaping maw of the torrent, the ogress's den before me. Mighty floods pushed against my shoulder." He continued until he reached the final verse. "The troll-wife's friend appeared, hideous and strong. I struck hard blows against him. My sword pierced his breast." People marveled at the staff, and the runes inscribed on it. Kron's even added a note, explaining how he had brought back the bones from the cave. The next morning, the priest arrived to find the staff and skin and read the runes. And as for Kron's, he returned home to Sandhauger, the bones still in his possession. When the priest met Kron's for the second time, he made a request of him. He asked Kron's to recount in detail what had happened during his journey. And so Kron's obliged, describing every twist and turn of his perilous adventure. He told the priest that he had held the rope with a feeble grip, and the priest acknowledged it was true. There was no question in the locals' minds that these monsters were responsible for the disappearances in the valley. But after Kron's had eliminated them, there were no more eerie noises or spectres lurking about. The bones of the deceased were interred in the churchyard, and the people felt some sense of peace again. Kron's hunkered down in Bardardal throughout the winter, all the while keeping a low profile. But word soon reached Thorir of Gard that Kron's was hiding in Bardardal. He dispatched his henchmen to track him down and slay him. In response, Kron's acquaintances urged him to take flight. Thus he journeyed westward to Modruveller, where he ran into Gudmund the Mighty. Kron's pleaded with him to provide him shelter, but Gudmund declined due to the inconvenience of the matter. "You need to search for a place to dwell in where you won't be in constant fear for your life," Gudmund advised Kron's. Kron's was without a clue as to where he could find such a safe haven. Gudmund pointed him in the direction of an island located in the Skagafjordur district called Drangi. He explained that it was an ideal location for a man in peril. The island's natural fortress-like qualities were such that it was impossible to access without a ladder. If Kron's could ascend to it without being caught, there would be little to no risk of anyone assaulting him with either brawn or guile, so long as Kron's made certain the ladder was properly guarded. Kron's voiced his desire to give Drengi a go, but also admitted his horror of darkness. He shared his apprehension of living in solitude even for the sake of his safety. That may indeed be true, Gudmund empathized, but don't let your guard down, even among those whom you feel you can trust. Many folk are not to be trusted. Kron's expressed his gratitude for Gudmund's sound counsel, and then made his way promptly over to Dala, where his mother and Illugi welcomed him eagerly. His visit was extended over several days, during which he learned about Thorstein Kjalarnes's untimely demise in the fall of the previous year, and he mused on the cruelty of fate. Afterward he headed to Holtavarda Heath, hoping to seek vengeance for Hallmund's death if he should come across Grim. Upon arriving in Nordraudal, he received the news that Grim had departed several years earlier, as previously mentioned. Krons had been hiding in the area for 2.5 years, and did not know of Grim's departure, having had no contact with others during his time there. He then began his journey towards the valleys of Breidafjord, and ambushed anyone who crossed over Bratabrekka. During the summertime, he continued to take advantage of the small farmers and their property. As summer drew to a close, Steinvor of Sandhauger gave birth to a son, who was named Osland. He was initially claimed to be fathered by Kjartan, the son of Ejardalsa's Stein the priest. Osland stood out from his family in his strength and enormous physique. He became the strongest man in the north at 15 years old, and was transferred to Krons's custody. There was hope that he would mature into something truly extraordinary, but he passed away at only 17, and there is no sagacious tale to recount his brief life. After Thorstein Kjalarnes passed away, Snorri the Godi had a falling out with his son Thorod, and with Sam, Bork, the fat son. It was never made clear what they did to anger him, except that they refused to take on an important task that he assigned to them. Regardless of the reason, Snorri disowned his son Thorod and forbade him from returning until he had killed a forest man. Thorod left and went to Dalir, where he heard about a young outlawed shepherd under the care of a widow named Geirlaug at Breidabolstad in Sokolfsdal. Thorod rode to Breidabolstad, intending to take the shepherd's life since he was an outlaw and a forest man. However, Geirlaug dissuaded him by offering a much more remarkable challenge: deal with Krons, the son of Avaroy, who lived up in the mountains. Thorod accepted the task, and he rode through the valleys until he reached the hills below the Ostra River. There he encountered Krons, who was riding a light-coloured horse and decked out in armour. Krons asked Thorod his name and business, to which he replied that he was Snorri the Godi's son. Krons questioned Thorod's ability to defeat him, but Thorod was confident in his strength and drew his sword. They clashed, but Krons refused to use his weapons against Thorod. After a while they were still fighting without any wounds inflicted on each other. Finally Krons broke off the fight and said, "You are the stronger man, Thorod, but let me give you a warning. My father, Avaroy, spoke a curse upon me before he died. He said that I would be the death of many men before my own fate caught up with me. All who have ever tried to tangle with me have come to regret it. So take this warning, Thorod, and leave me alone. It would be wiser for you to face someone else." Thorod refused to heed Krons's warning and pressed on, aiming to fulfill his quest. But what he did not know was that he was about to face the most challenging and dangerous task of his life. "Let us cease this play-acting, my friend. You will not emerge victorious in a confrontation with me," said Krons. Thorod strained himself to lash out at Krons with all his might, but to no avail. Krons, tired of the futile attempt, lifted him up and gently set him next to himself. "I could make you suffer at my will, but I am not afraid of your deadly prowess. Rather, I am more concerned about your wise and respected father, Snorri the Godi, and his shrewd advice that has led many men to their downfall. You should stick to tasks that you can handle, for fighting me is no child's play," Krons said. Thorod realized the truth in Krons's words, and calmed himself down. They parted ways with mutual respect. Thorod rode back to Tunga and recounted his encounter with Krons to his father. Snorri anticipated the outcome and chuckled. "Many men overestimate themselves, but you were no match for Krons. While you were struggling to hit him, he effortlessly outmaneuvered you. Krons, however, was wise not to harm you, for my wrath would have been unquenchable. From now on, I shall lend my support to his causes if needed." Snorri approved of Krons's conduct towards Thorod, as he always favoured Krons's wisdom and astuteness. May the gods guide your steps and keep you safe from harm. Krons, remember that your ancestors will aid you. Call upon them for strength when needed, and Illugi, be a faithful companion to your brother in this time of need." With tears in their eyes, the brothers bid farewell to their mother and began their journey to Drangey. They travelled by night, avoiding the eyes of anyone who might recognize them. Krons was grateful for Illugi's company, for he was no longer alone in his fear. As they walked, Illugi would sing songs to lift their spirits and remind Krons of happier times. After several days of travel, they reached the shore where a boat was waiting for them. They climbed aboard and set sail for Drangey, a small island off the coast of Iceland. It was a treacherous journey, but with Illugi's help, Krons managed to keep his fear at bay. When they arrived on the island, Krons knew that they wouldn't be able to leave for some time. Drangey was inaccessible by boat for most of the year, surrounded by steep cliffs that made it nearly impossible to climb. They would be safe here, but they would also be alone. Krons and Illugi built a small hut for themselves, using driftwood and whatever they could find on the island. They spent their days fishing and hunting, taking care to always be vigilant for any potential threats. It was a lonely existence, but they kept each other company and tried to make the most of what they had. Years passed, and Krons became known as the Hermit of Drangey. People would talk of the strange man who lived alone on the island, and some would even venture out to try and find him. But Krons and Illugi remained hidden, knowing that they were safest when they were alone. Eventually, Krons passed away, leaving Illugi alone on the island. It was a difficult time for him, but he knew that his brother was at peace. Years later, Illugi would return to the mainland, telling stories of his time on Drangey, and the brother who had stood by him until the end. The words of the mother tumbled out with sorrow and foreboding. "Sad will be your death together, and no one can escape destiny. I will never see either of you again, and may the same fate befall both of you. I don't know what safety you think you'll find in Drangey, but that is where your bones will rest, and many will resent your presence there. Beware of treachery, but also be wary of the weapon's sting, for I have had strange dreams. And guard yourselves against witchcraft, for ancient spells hold great power." Her tears flowed freely, and Krons consoled her. "Don't weep, mother. If we are attacked with weapons, it will be said that you had sons and not daughters. Live well, and farewell." They parted, and the two brothers journeyed north, visiting their kinsmen throughout the autumn until winter's chill gripped the land. They continued on, passing Skagafjord and Vatnskurd, until they reached Glaumberg at dusk. Krons, as always, slung his hat over his shoulder, heedless of the cold. As they journeyed on, they encountered a man, tall and thin and ill-clad, with a big head. He introduced himself as Thor Draugr, a vagrant who enjoyed swaggering and gossiping, and who was known for being the butt of many jokes. Krons found him amusing, and when Thor Draugr offered to work for them, they allowed him to join their company. Despite the driving snow, he proved to be fussy and talkative, earning the nickname Glaum. "Glaumberg's folk were much concerned about your lack of a hat in this weather," he chattered, "and wondered if you were braver for it. 2 distinguished local sons of Bondis were assigned to mind the sheep, but they could barely get dressed for the frigid cold." Krons surveyed the scene before him, the young man outside donning his mittens, and another bustling about his daily chores. But they did not cause him any alarm. Instead, he pressed on, travelling to Rhenines, where he and his companions found refuge for the night before ultimately making their way to the coast. There they stumbled upon a farmhouse owned by a reputable man named Thorvald. Krons sought shelter and divulged his plans of heading to Drangey. With a wary expression etched onto his face, Thorvald cautioned the travellers, telling them that the Skagafjord residents would not look kindly upon such a visit, but Krons was nothing if not resourceful. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a purse his mother had given him, and handed it over to the Bondi, and as if by magic the man's expression softened, and he directed 3 of his servants to stealthily guide the group by moonlight to the nearby island, which was just a sea-mile away from Reykjavik. When they finally arrived at their destination, Krons's initial impression of Drangey was that it was almost charming in its isolation. The island was awash with long green grass, and the cliffs that skirted it were so steep they would prove to be an impenetrable barrier to those who wished to gain access, save for the ladders that were the only way up. Krons knew that if the top ladder were to be pulled up, it would prove impossible for any person to gain entry. Additionally, there was a large crag filled with seabirds, who no doubt called it home in the summer. Furthermore, The island was home to 80 sheep belonging to the Bondis, mostly rams and ewes that were to be used for their meat. It was here on this remote and wind-whipped island that Krons decided to make his home. According to Sturla, the son of Thord, Krons had been on the run for 15 to 16 years, and now, finally, he had found a place of refuge. Chapter 17. The People of Skagafjord. When Krons arrived at Drangi, the Skagafjord region was bustling with chiefs of great repute. One such esteemed figure was Hjalti, residing in Hof in Hjaltadal, the mighty son of Thord, the son of Hjalti, the son of Thord Scalp. Hjalti's popularity and prowess matched his status as a great chief. His brother Thord Draugur Angle was equally formidable, but his sturdy build belied a quarrelsome nature that often got him into trouble. The brothers were not the stepmother's biological children, and she bore ill will towards them, especially towards Thord Draugur. One fateful day, she caught him slacking while playing a game of tables, using large peg pieces, and struck him in anger. In response, he gave her a vicious beating, which left her bedridden and, unfortunately, pregnant. His descent into ruffianhood was rapid and ruthless, and he soon claimed his property and left for Vidvik. Haldor from Hofdastrand, son of Thorgeir and grandson of Thord from Hofti, was a worthy Bondi and wealthy. He married Thordis, Hjalti, and Thord Draugur's sister. Draugur, a close friend of Haldor, also lived in the region, residing in Haganes in Fliot. The two men stood by each other in every dispute. Tungu Stein, on the other hand, resided in Steinstadir and was highly renowned. He was the son of Draugur, the son of Gudrun Thinbeard, the son of Krau Hreidar, who was gifted Tunga below Skalamir by Eyvindr of Guddle. Eyvindr was the son of Holmgang Stari, the son of Eyvindr of Guddle, the son of Hrold, and the son of Geirmund Straightbeard. Eyvindr resided at Hof in Guddle, and he was considered a man of high standing. At Breda in Sletalid, two brothers named Thord peacefully coexisted, and their brute strength was well known. All of these men had a share in Drangi, an island co-owned by no less than 20 individuals, each unwilling to give up their portion, with the lion's share belonging to the wealthy sons of Thord. Midwinter had passed, and the Bondis were getting ready to bring their animals back from the island for slaughter. They got on a boat, each with a man or two, and headed for the island. As they approached, they saw people moving around on the shore. It was a strange sight, but they assumed that someone had been shipwrecked and sought refuge there. As they pulled up to the shore, the people there raised the ladders and wouldn't let them on. This was odd behavior, so the Bondis called out and asked who they were. Krons spoke up and gave his name and the names of his companions. The Bondis asked who had brought them to the island. Krons replied, "He brought me here, someone with hands and who was more my friend than yours." The Bondis proposed that they all go back to land together, and that Krons and his companions could have their property back. But Krons refused. "Each of us will keep what we've taken," he said. "I won't leave this island unless I'm dead or forcibly removed." The Bondis realized they had no other options, and returned home empty-handed. They spread word of the wolves occupying the island, a dilemma that had caught them off guard. They spent the winter discussing what to do, but couldn't find a way to remove Krons from the island. As spring drew near, the Hegranes Thing called upon all men from all corners of its territory to gather in great numbers. They came with their merrymaking and palavering, eager to partake in the festivities. But Krons had other plans. He schemed with his friends, always willing to spare no expense to ensure their success. Krons decided to go for supplies, leaving Illugi and Glaum behind to guard the ladder. Despite Illugi's reservations, Krons was determined to have his way. Illugi warned them both to keep a close eye on the ladder, knowing full well that everything depended on it. Krons disappeared into the land, keeping his disguise tightly on so that no one might recognize him. He heard of the fun and frolics at the thing and couldn't resist the pull. He dressed in old, shabby clothes and made his way to the festivities. As he arrived, young men chatted idly about the good weather, proposing games and wrestling. They sat before their booths and enjoyed the sun. The sons of Thord took center stage in the wrestling tournament, particularly the proudly uppish Thord Draugur Angle. Unsurprisingly, not many people were eager to take on the Thords in a wrestling match. Thord Draugur looked around and spotted a large, imposing figure sitting nearby. He reached out to grab him and pull him into the tournament, but the man remained immovable. Thord Draugur marveled, "Nobody has stood so firm against me today as you, but pray tell, who might you be?" "My name is Guest," replied the stranger. Thordrauger warmly welcomed him, saying, "You will want to partake in our festivities. You are a welcome guest." Guest hesitated. "Things may change quickly. I cannot join in your games, for I have no knowledge of them." The other men insisted they would appreciate it if he, a stranger, would participate in some activities. Guest asked what they wanted him to do, and they asked him to wrestle with one of them. Guest declined, saying he had given up wrestling, although he used to take pleasure in it. As he didn't directly refuse, they pressured him even more. "Well," he finally relented, "if you want to drag me in, you must grant me peace here at the Thing and on my journey home." The men all shouted their agreement and promised to fulfill his request. Out of all of them, a man by the name of Haf, son of Thorarin, son of Haf, son of Thord Knap, was the most vocal in urging for peace to be granted. Haf owned land and resided in Knapstad, and he was known to be very talkative. He spoke with great authority, declaring, "I hereby declare peace between all men, particularly between this man seated here, named Guest, and all Godord's men, full bondis, all men of war and bearers of arms, all other men of this district of the Hegranes Thing, whencesoever they have come, both named and unnamed. I declare peace and full immunity in favor of this newcomer, known to us as Guest, for the practice of games, wrestling, and all kinds of sport, while abiding here and during his journey home, whether he sails or travels by land or sea. He shall have peace in all places, named and unnamed, for as long as he needs to safely reach his home, confirmed by our faith. I establish this peace among our kin, friends, and belongings, be they women or men, bondsmen or thralls, youths or adults. And let it be known that any who dare to break this truce and betray this faith shall be shunned by God and cast out from the community of righteous men. They shall be banished from heaven and forbidden from the fellowship of the holy. Let them have no place amongst mankind and become a pariah of society. They will wander as a vagabond and wolves in places where Christians pray and where heathens worship, where the flames of fire burn and the earth brings forth its treasures, where a child utters its first words and a mother brings forth a son, where men kindle fire, where ships sail, where shields shine and the sun shines bright, where the snow lies deep and Finn glides on skates, where the fir tree grows tall and falcons fly all day long on fair winds. Let them dwell far from the church and Christian men, from heathen sons, from house and cave and every home, suffering the torments of hell. As for us, we shall know peace and concord, with friendly minds united wherever we meet, on mountains or shores, on ships or snowshoes, on plains or glaciers, at sea or on horseback. We shall be like water, meeting as friends or brothers on the way, at peace with each other as sons with their fathers, or fathers with their sons in all our dealings. We lay our hands together to hold true to our faith, and the words spoken today in the presence of God and holy men, to all who hear these words and are present here today." There was much praise for this powerful declaration. Guest was among those who spoke up, declaring that the words spoken were both wise and true. He pledged to uphold the treaty and all that it stood for. As a show of faith, he cast off his hood and upper garments, revealing himself to be Kron's, a man of towering stature and indomitable strength. All who saw him were struck with awe, knowing that he would stand with them in the pursuit of peace. The air was thick with tension, and Half shifted nervously, feeling foolish for his role in this dispute. The men of the district whispered to one another, each pointing fingers and placing blame, especially on the one who had called for peace. Krons, growing impatient with their stalling, demanded that they speak plainly and share their true intentions. He was not one to waste time sitting around half-dressed, and he knew they had more at stake than he did. The men murmured amongst themselves, unsure of what to do. The sons of Thord exchanged hushed whispers with their brother-in-law, Haldor, some of them wanting to uphold the peace and others ready to break it. Each nodded in agreement with their own side. Then Kron spoke a verse, cutting through the quiet with his sharp tongue. "Many a man is filled with doubt. A twofold mask has the prover of shields. The skilful tongue is put to shame. They doubt if they shall hold the troth." Tungerstein responded, questioning Krons's words. "Do you truly believe that, Krons? What will the chieftains decide? You are the most courageous of us all. Can you not see how they are conspiring together?" Krons replied with another verse, mocking the men's huddled whispers. "Together they all their noses laid. They wagged their beards in close converse. They talked with each other by two and two, regretting the peace they afore declared." Hjalti, the son of Thord, spoke up, determined to hold the peace despite the group's wavering resolve. We will not break this peace, even though our hearts may be pulling us in another direction. We cannot let others see us break the very peace we ourselves declared. Krons may leave unharmed and will have peace until he reaches his home from this journey. At that point, this truce will have expired, no matter what may come our way." The other men praised Hjalti for his staunch leadership in the face of uncertainty. Thordraugur Angle remained silent, and it was proposed that one of the Thord brothers should challenge Krons. Thord stepped forward, and with all his might he charged at Krons. But Krons stood his ground, grabbing onto Thord's breeches and tripping him up so that he crashed backwards onto his shoulders. The other men looked on in awe, suddenly reminded of Krons's true strength and skill. The crowd murmured, urging the two brothers to take him down. They charged at Krons, and a fierce tussle ensued. Each brother took turns on top, but Krons always found a way to stay on his feet. They were so evenly matched that neither could gain the advantage. Their grip was so tight that they were all left battered and bloody. Despite the brutal fight, everyone in the crowd applauded, finding the wrestling match to be a grand spectacle. They even thanked the brothers once they had finished. Those closest to the action concluded that the brothers together were no stronger than Krons alone, as each had the strength of two men. Yet when they fought together, neither of them could beat Krons. Krons didn't stick around at the thing for long. Although asked by the Bondis to give up the island, he boldly refused, and they were left with nothing accomplished. Upon Krons's return to Drangey, Illugi welcomed him back with open arms. The men spent the rest of the summer in peace, and Krons shared tales of his journeys. Everyone admired the men of Skagafjord for, even after everything Krons had done against them, they still handled matters peacefully. The less wealthy Bondis, on the other hand, started to whisper amongst themselves, thinking that owning a small share of the island was not very profitable. Thus they offered to sell their holdings to the sons of Thord. Hjalti refused the offer to buy the shares, forcing the Bondis to stipulate that any buyer should kill or remove Krons from the island. Thordraugur Angle, an unpopular and violent man, volunteered to lead the charge and take down Krons for a price. As a result, several other Bondis sold their shares to Thordraugur Angle at a lower price, allowing him to acquire a significant portion of the island. In return, he promised to remove Krons from the area. In the waning days of summer, Thordraugur Angle set sail with a fully staffed boat, bound for Drangey. As they neared the cliff face, Krons and his cohorts emerged into view, and they began to converse in earnest. Thordraugur implored Krons to leave the island, to do him this one favor. Krons, however, was not optimistic about the prospect. Thordraugur countered, "I may be able to persuade you yet. You see, many of the Bondis have relinquished their shares of the island to me." Krons remained unyielding. "It is precisely because you now own the lion's share of the island that I refuse to leave. We must divide the cabbage evenly. True, it was daunting to have all of Skagafjord against me, but no longer. We needn't spare each other, since neither is restrained by affection for his fellows. You may as well cease your journeys here, for this matter is resolved." "All in good time," Thordraugur said, "and you choose to dwell on the negative." "I must take my chances," Krons replied, and so they parted ways. Thordraugur returned home, yet his mind was still roiled with the unfinished business on the island. Chapter 18. The Problem. It is said that Krons and his cohorts had been dwelling on the Isle of Drangey for 2 long years, and during that time they had hunted and slain almost every single sheep. Yet there remained one solitary ram that they had spared. Sporting a coat of grey fleece and boasting a pair of mighty horns, this creature was a source of amusement for the men. Unusually friendly, it would tag along with them, and even lean against the threshold of their abode, scraping its horns against the door. Despite their depleted food supply, the trio lived quite comfortably thanks to the abundant bird life on the island and their precious eggs. Collecting firewood was also a task made easy by the constant arrival of driftwood, which Krons paid one of the men to gather. Working was a rare occurrence for the brothers, who only ventured out to the cliffs for leisure. The lone thrall assigned to them, however, grew increasingly lazy with his duties. He would often grumble and did not execute his tasks with much care. One night, the thrall was tasked with tending to the fire, a responsibility that was of utmost importance as they had no way of relighting a flame without a boat. Yet, as ill fate would have it, the fire went out completely. Krons was furious and threatened to punish the thrall severely for his mistake. The mistreated thrall lamented that his life was already bleak enough, living in exile and receiving lashings for all manner of mishaps. Kron's turned to Illugi for counsel, and the wise man could only think of one solution. They must wait for the arrival of a ship to bring new fire. However, Kron's was not willing to chance such a precarious wait for a questionably reliable outcome. He decided that he would take it upon himself to cross the sea and fetch the fire they so desperately needed. Illugi warned him of the risks, but Kron's was undaunted. He had little faith left in the thrall, and this was a chance he simply could not afford to squander. Swimming across the channel which separated the island from the mainland was a distance of 1 solitary mile, and yet the danger that lay ahead was incalculable. Kron's prepared for his swim, donning a rough cloak and breeches with webbed fingers. The skies were clear, and he departed from the island as the sun began to set. Illugi believed Kron's was doomed to fail in his endeavour. However, Kron's was fortunate to have the current in his favour, and the water was tranquil as he made his way towards the fjord. He struck the water with determination and pushed himself until he reached Reykjanes after nightfall. He ventured into Reykjanes settlement, soaking in a warm spring in the darkness before entering the hall. The room was hot and hazy from a fire that had burned throughout the day. Exhausted, Kron's fell into a deep slumber as the night wore on. As daybreak approached, the servants began to stir, and 2 women entered the room. They spotted a man lying there, asleep and naked, with his clothes strewn about on the floor. They recognized him as Kron's, the son of Averoy. One of the women exclaimed, "By my salvation, sister, it is Kron's. He is quite large in his upper body, but strangely small below. It is quite unusual." The other woman scolded her, calling her foolish for speaking such nonsense. Despite her sister's admonishments, the first woman couldn't contain her laughter as she approached Kron's to inspect him more closely. Kron's awoke to her teasing and gave chase, reciting a verse in playful retaliation. Later, Kron's sought out the bondy Thorvald, explaining his situation and requesting a ride back to the island. Thorvald lent him a ship and escorted him back. Kron's expressed his gratitude, and soon the tale of his bravery began to spread amongst the people, earning him admiration for his courage both on land and sea. The men of Skagafjord were displeased with Thordraugar Angle for failing in his attempts to rid Drangi of Kron's, insisting they be refunded for their efforts. Thordraugar urged them to be patient, refusing to acquiesce to their demands. That summer, a ship arrived at Gongus Kurdsos, carrying a lively young man named Herring. He had no trouble scaling any cliff, a skill he was eager to show off to Thordraugar Angle, whom he visited and stayed with until autumn. Herring pestered Thordraugar to take him to Drangi Island, where he could prove his mettle by climbing an impossibly high cliff. Thordraugar agreed, but only if Herring would either kill or wound Kron's, the island's resident. Herring agreed to the daunting task, and on the day of their expedition, Thordraugar left him at a specific spot and instructed him not to draw any attention to himself. Then they set up the ladder and engaged in a lengthy argument with Kron's and his people, trying to convince him to leave the island. However, Kron's refused to budge. Meanwhile, Herring climbed the cliffs, determined to reach the summit, a feat no man had accomplished before. When he finally reached the top, he saw the 2 brothers with their backs to him, oblivious to his presence. Herring gleefully anticipated the wealth and fame he'd soon accrue from defeating them both. Back and forth insults were traded between the 2 groups, until Illugi turned around and spotted Herring, who was getting perilously close with his axe. Illugi alerted Kron's, who kept watch on the ladder while Illugi confronted Herring. Herring fled in a panic, a slippery game of cat and mouse ensuing until Illugi finally caught up to him. Herring met his end after he plunged over the island's edge, shattering his body on impact. The place where he perished came to be called Herring's Leap. Illugi had returned from his mission, and Kron's asked him how it had gone with his man. "He wouldn't trust me to manage for him," Illugi replied. "He broke his neck over the cliff. May the Bondis pray for him as for a dead man." Angle heard the news and immediately ordered his men to shove off. "I've been to meet Kron's twice already," he said. "If I come again and return still none the wiser, they can stay in Drangi as far as I'm concerned. But something tells me Kron's won't be sticking around as long as he has been." They went back home, and it was even worse than the first journey. Kron's remained in Drangi and didn't see Thordraugar for the rest of the winter. Skapti the lawman passed away that season, which was a great loss for Kron's. He had promised to push for a removal of his sentence after being an outlaw for 20 years, and this was only the 19th. Snorri the Godi also passed away in the spring. That summer at the All Thing, Krons's friends talked extensively about his outlaw status, with some arguing that he had completed his term when he had reached any point in his 20th year. Others opposed this, insisting that Krons had continued to commit outlaw-worthy deeds since then, and therefore his sentence should be extended. An esteemed lawman, Stein, had just been appointed. His father Thorgest was the son of Stein, the far traveller, who descended from Thorir Autumn Mist. Stein's mother was Arnora, daughter of Thord the Yeller. As a wise man, Stein was sought out for his opinion. He advised them to conduct a thorough search to determine the exact length of Krons's outlawry, a difficult task, as Thorir of Gard did everything in his power to hinder the investigation. Nonetheless, they discovered that Krons had spent a year in Iceland, rendering him free of his outlaw status for that duration. This meant that he had only been outlawed for 19 years. The lawman declared that no one could be outlawed for more than 20 years, irrespective of any outlaw-worthy deeds committed during that period. However, he would not allow Krons's release before that limit was reached. Thus, the attempt to remove Krons's sentence failed at the moment. However, the prospect of his freedom loomed in the following summer. The men of Skagafjord were displeased at the thought of Krons's release. They demanded that Thordraugur Angle resolve an issue. He would either resign from his position as holder of the island or kill Krons. Though he wished to maintain his holding, he saw no way to kill Krons. He attempted every conceivable method to overpower Krons, whether by force or trickery, but all his efforts proved futile. Thordraugur Angle was a man with a problem, and, like many people with problems, he turned to the one person who could solve it, his old mother Thurid. Despite her age and little use to society, Thurid had once been a skilled witch, and now Thordraugur Angle hoped she could still perform her magical feats. Although Christianity had taken over, remnants of heathendom still remained, and it wasn't forbidden to perform heathen rituals in private. So, Thordraugur Angle sought his Falkland mother's help, knowing that she still possessed an understanding of the ancient ways. This surprised many people, but Angle was desperate. He had tried everything and failed. So he went to his mother and asked her what she could do. He was willing to try anything, even if it meant turning to his mother's heathen ways. Thurid replied, "It seems to me that many go to the goat house to get wool. But what would be better than thinking yourself above other men in the country, only to be reduced to nothing when it comes to a trial? Although I'm not as spry as I used to be, I have some valuable advice that could help you, but you must let me do things my way." Angle consented to her request and said that she had always given him good advice in the past. Summer was approaching, and one fine day Thurid suggested to her son, "The weather is now calm and bright. I think you should go to Drengi and pick a fight with Krons. I will come with you and listen to his words with care. I need to observe how he is prospering before I can say anything about it." Angle hesitated for a moment, but eventually relented, agreeing to go to Drengi. He hoped that something good would come out of his mother's strategy. "She spoke of much toil ahead for the laying of Krons in the earth," the woman said with a solemn tone. "Your journey will be riddled with uncertainty and difficulties before it's done, but you are bound to see it through somehow." Thordraugur Angle and his crew of 11 men rowed in a 10-oared boat towards Drengi, with the woman accompanying them. When the brothers saw them approach, they stepped forward to the ladder and engaged in another discussion about their issue. Thordraugur reiterated his inquiry about Krons leaving the place, promising to overlook the destruction of his property if they parted in peace. However, Krons remained adamant about staying and said that no amount of talking would convince him otherwise. Thordraugur realized that he would not achieve his objective this time and commented that he knew what kind of people he was dealing with. Krons dismissively retorted that it wouldn't bother him if Thordraugur never came back. The woman had been lying in the boat's stern sheets, wrapped in clothes, and suddenly stirred. She praised the brothers' bravery and pointed out the vast difference between them, that they reject everything even when offered good things. She then turned to Krons and spoke bitterly, wishing him ill fortune, ill health, and misfortune, that he becomes deprived of all protection and counsel as he continued to live. Krons reacted aggressively, asking who the fiend on the ship was. Illugi answered that it must be Thordraugur's Falkland mother, an old woman with powerful magic. "May the hag be cursed!" he exclaimed, his voice seething with anger. "Her words were the worst thing I could have imagined. I fear the evil that will surely come from her spells. She'll regret ever stepping foot in this place." Without hesitation, he grabbed a massive stone and hurled it into the boat's cargo. The impact echoed throughout the area, followed quickly by a scream. The stone had found its target, shattering the old woman's thigh. I wish you hadn't done that, Illugi said. Do not blame me, Krons retorted. It was long overdue. One old woman's life is a small price to pay for our honor. How will she repay us? That won't be enough, Illugi asked. Thordraugur made his way home, not exchanging any words with the two men as they parted ways. Upon his return he spoke to the hag who lay on the bed in agony. As I suspected, it was a fruitless journey. Your injury is just a small price to pay for our lack of success. These men will face destruction. From this moment on, they'll spiral down into their own demise. I don't care if I live or die, as long as I get vengeance for this, the hag replied, her voice filled with venom. You seem quite content, he remarked before they arrived at their destination. She remained bedridden for the next month, and no luck came from their dealings with Krons. The people laughed at their misfortune, but Thordraugur bore the brunt of their ridicule. The fall was fading away, and only 3 weeks remained before winter made its arrival known. The old woman requested a trip to the sea, so Thordraugur inquired as to why she wished to go. It is a small task, she replied, yet it may be the harbinger of greater things to come. They obeyed her wishes and journeyed to the shore. She hobbled along the water's edge, seemingly searching for something. Finally, she came upon a giant tree stump, which looked as if it could only be carried by a man's shoulder. The old woman motioned for it to be turned over and bequeathed them a request to carve a small flat surface. She then utilized a knife, cutting runes into it in scarlet ink and applying magic spells. The eerie mutterings of a language unknown to the others sounded wicked as they surrounded the poor, wood-unearthed woman. She marched around the stump backward, facing the sun and casting more dark phrases. Afterward, she commanded them to shove the timber into the sea, declaring it would ultimately target Drangi and bring agony upon Krons. Upon returning to Vidvik, Thordraugur confessed to the woman that he had no inkling of what would occur. The woman solemnly informed him that his understanding would arrive in time. Although the wind was sweeping in the direction of the fjords, the woman's stump floated opposite the direction, implying more was occurring than any could have anticipated. Now, Krons and his gang were lounging around in Drangi with ease. Suddenly they decided to look for wood the following day. Upon reaching the western edge of the island, they were surprised to find a massive tree stump stranded on the sand. "We could use this as fuel!" exclaimed Illugi. "Let us carry it back." Krons, however, kicked it and declared, "This evil log was not meant for us to use. Let us hasten to find other firewood." He strongly urged Illugi to leave it behind, explaining how it was sent to hurt them. After reaching their shelter, they imparted nothing of what they had witnessed to the servant. The following day they stumbled upon the tree anew, situated even nearer to the ladder than before. Krons, infuriated, tossed it back into the sea and vowed to leave it there permanently. The inclement weather soon arrived, drenching everything with rain and discouraging any outdoor excursions, but they still required firewood. They commanded Glaum to retrieve the fuel, but he complained harshly, claiming it was unjust to force him to work himself to death in any weather condition. He ambled down the ladder and encountered the woman's log just lying there. He considered himself fortunate, wrestled it home to the hut, and dropped it onto the ground, emitting a tremendous clamour that caught Krons's ear. "Glaum found something. I must inspect it," he muttered as he grabbed his wood-cutting axe. "Don't mutilate it worse than I carried it home," Glaum joked bitterly. Krons grew agitated with the slave's insolence, utilizing both hands to strike the log with the axe, oblivious to its identity. The moment the iron touched the wood, it immediately flattened, and the axe ricocheted straight into Krons's right leg. The tool penetrated the skin above his knee and perforated the bone underneath, causing a severe injury. Krons swiveled his head to view the log and exclaimed, "The one who intended me harm has triumphed. This is far from over. This is the very log that I denied twice before. 2 catastrophes you have caused, Glaum. First, you permitted our fire to extinguish, and now you've brought in this tree of misfortune. A third error will conclude you and everyone else." Illugi wrapped his wound, and even though it barely bled, Krons slept peacefully that night, with no discomfort for 3 days straight. When they replaced the bandages, the wound had mostly mended, and Illugi declared, "I don't believe that you will suffer for long because of this wound." "That would be nice," confessed Krons. "No matter how this concludes, it's been a bizarre occurrence, but my intuition is telling me otherwise." Chapter 19. The spell continues to work.